I've seen men broken by this desert, by thirst, by greed, by the kind of injustice that wears a badge and calls itself law. But in 1883, I witnessed something different, a quiet rancher who refused to break. And what happened when 15 armed men came to teach him the cost of that refusal? These lands know pain better than joy. Every mark in the sand tells a story, but folks rarely listen. I saw this tale with my own eyes, like the crackle of a fire at night. The shadows of the past don't leave. You'd best listen close. Out here, it's the only way to survive. This story ain't mine, but I was there when it happened, or close enough to hear the truth of it from men who don't lie. Not about things like this. It was 1883, the year the fence cutters started their war in Texas. But this wasn't Texas. This was Arizona territory, Cochise County, where the Cowboys ruled the range, and the law was whatever Johnny Bean said it was on any given day. The land was red. Red dirt, red rocks, red sunsets that looked like the whole world was bleeding out. There was a rancher named Caleb Moss. He wasn't old, maybe 35, but the desert ages a man faster than time does. His face was leather. His hands were scarred from wire and rope and the 1,000 small cuts that come from working land that don't want to be worked. Caleb had a small spread, 50 head of cattle, a water hole that ran year-round. That was gold out there, real gold, more valuable than silver or copper or any ore you could pull from the ground. Water meant life, and life meant men would kill for it. He'd built his ranch with his own hands. Every post, every fence line, every damn board in that little house where he slept alone under a roof that leaked when the rare rains came. He didn't ask for trouble, didn't go looking for it in the saloons of Tombstone or Bisbee. He kept to himself, worked dawn to dusk, said his prayers at night, though I don't think God was listening much in those days. But trouble has a way of finding quiet men. The first sign came on a Tuesday morning. Caleb rode out to check his northern fence line and found it cut, not broken by some steer pushing through. Cut clean with wire snips. Professional. Deliberate. 30 head of his cattle were gone. He stood there in the dust, staring at that cut wire like it was a message written in a language he didn't want to understand. The tracks were clear. For horses, heading south toward the border, toward Mexico, where stolen cattle disappeared into haciendas and no lawman would follow. Caleb could have ridden to town, could have told Sheriff Bean about the rustling, but he knew how that would go. Bean was friendly with the Cowboys, the loose gang of ranchers and rustlers and Confederate sympathizers who controlled the county like it was their own private kingdom. They wore their allegiance openly, Democrats to the core, Southern boys who'd never forgiven the North for winning the war. Caleb had fought for the Union, cavalry, saw action in Virginia. That made him an outsider here, a Republican carpetbagger in their eyes, even though he'd bought his land fair and square with money saved from 10 years of hard labor. So he didn't report it. He rode back to his ranch, fixed the fence himself, and waited. The second time they came was worse. A week later, middle of the night, Caleb woke to the sound of gunfire, ran outside in his long johns with his Henry rifle to see his barn burning, flames reaching up into the black sky like the devil's own fingers, his 2 horses screaming inside. He ran toward the barn, but the heat drove him back. The horses' screams stopped. That silence was worse than the noise, for riders sat on the ridge above his property, silhouettes against the orange glow of the fire, watching. One of them laughed. The sound carried down the slope clear as a bell. Then they rode off, slow, like they had all the time in the world. Caleb stood there watching everything he'd built burn. The barn collapsed in a shower of sparks. His horses dead inside. His tools, his saddles, all of it gone. He didn't cry, didn't curse, just watched until the fire burned itself out and the dawn came up gray and cold. That morning he rode to Tombstone, 20 miles, on foot because his horses were dead. It took him all day. His boots weren't made for walking, and by the time he reached town his feet were bleeding inside them. He found Sheriff Bean at the Crystal Palace Saloon. Bean was drinking whiskey with some of the Cowboys, Curly Bill Brocious, Johnny Ringo, Men whose names were spoken in whispers. Men who'd killed more people than cholera. Caleb told his story, standing there in his dusty clothes with his feet bleeding and his face hollow from lack of sleep. He told Bean about the cut fence, the stolen cattle, the burned barn, the dead horses. Bean listened, took a drink of his whiskey, then asked Caleb if he'd seen the faces of the men who'd done it. No, Caleb said. It was dark. They were just shapes against the fire. Then there ain't much I can do, Bean said. Can't arrest a man for being a shape. The Cowboys laughed. Johnny Ringo smiled into his glass like it was the funniest thing he'd heard all week. Caleb stood there, understanding finally settling over him like dust. The law wasn't going to help him. The law was sitting right here drinking with the man who'd probably ordered his barn burned, or done it themselves. Out here the badge didn't mean justice. It meant power. And Bean's power came from keeping the Cowboys happy. You could file a report, Bean said. His voice was almost kind. Almost. But that's about all I can offer you, Mr. Moss. Without witnesses. Without proof. My hands are tied. Caleb walked out of that saloon, past the faro tables, past the painted women and the men who spent their days drinking away money stolen from Mexican ranchers and stagecoach strongboxes. He walked out into the street where the sun was setting and the dust was rising and the whole town smelled like horse shit and coal smoke and failed dreams. He stood there for a long time, watching the light die. A man can only be pushed so far before something breaks inside him, before the part that believes in law and order and doing things the right way just gives up and something older takes its place. Something from back when men settled their own problems, with fire and steel and blood. Caleb Moss had been a good man, a law-abiding man, a man who believed the system would work if you just followed the rules and kept your head down and didn't make trouble. But standing there in that Tombstone Street, with his feet bleeding and his livelihood destroyed, and the law sitting drunk in a saloon with the men who'd ruined him, something changed. I saw it in his eyes later, heard it in the way men talked about what happened next. That moment when civilization falls away, and you realize you're still just an animal trying to survive in a world that wants you dead. Caleb bought a gun, a Colt .45 Peacemaker, paid for it with the last of his money. The gunsmith asked if he wanted ammunition. Yeah, Caleb said. Give me everything you got. The desert teaches you patience. Or it kills you. There ain't no middle ground. Caleb learned that lesson young. He took his new Colt and his ammunition and walked back to his ranch, 20 miles on bleeding feet, through the night, through the cold that comes when the sun dies and the desert remembers it's closer to death than life. He didn't sleep when he got home. He practiced instead, set up bottles on fence posts, tin cans on rocks, drew and fired until his hand cramped and his ears rang and the hammer clicked on empty chambers. Then he loaded again, drew again, fired again. The neighbors heard it. Old Willem van der Berg, whose spread bordered Caleb's to the east. He rode over on the third day, found Caleb in the yard surrounded by spent brass casings. His right hand was blistered raw. His eyes were hollow. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in a week. Because he hadn't. What are you doing, Caleb? Willem asked. He was Dutch, spoke with an accent thick as molasses. Good man, though. Fair. The kind who'd help you mend fence or round up strays without asking for payment. Preparing, Caleb said. He didn't stop reloading. His fingers worked the cylinders like a man saying rosaries. For what? For when they come back. Willem sat his horse for a long minute, watching. The wind moved through the sparse grass. Somewhere a hawk cried out hunting something small and doomed. Listen to me, Willem said finally. I know what happened. Word travels. The Cowboys did this to you. Everyone knows it. But Caleb, you can't fight them. There's too many. And they got Bean in their pocket. Caleb finished loading, spun the cylinder. The click was loud in the quiet. Then I'll die, he said simply. But I'll take some of them with me. That ain't the way, Willem said. You need to leave. Sell the land. What's left of it. Go to California. Start over. There's no shame in that. Caleb looked up at him then. His eyes were different. Harder. Like something inside had calcified into stone. "I built this place," he said. "Every inch. With my own hands. My own sweat. I buried my father under that cottonwood tree by the waterhole. This is my land. Mine. And I ain't leaving." Willem tried again. Tried to reason with him. Tried to explain that principle didn't mean much when you're dead. That land could be bought again, but a life couldn't. That sometimes a man had to know when he was beat. But Caleb wasn't listening anymore. He was looking past Willem toward the southern ridge, where the 4 riders had sat watching his barn burn, where they'd laughed at his ruin. "You should go," Caleb said quietly, "before they see you talking to me. Don't want them thinking you're involved." Willem started to protest, but something in Caleb's voice stopped him. It was the voice of a man already dead, already a ghost, just waiting for his body to catch up with the inevitable. So Willem left, rode back to his own ranch, and that night he told his wife to pack. They left the territory 2 weeks later, sold their land for half what it was worth, and disappeared into New Mexico. I heard they made it to Santa Fe, started mercantile, did well enough, but he always regretted leaving. Told people years later that he should have stayed, should have helped Caleb, should have stood with him against what was coming. But I understood why he didn't. Fear ain't cowardice. Fear is what keeps a man alive long enough to see his grandchildren. Caleb didn't have fear anymore. He traded it for something else. Something darker and cleaner and infinitely more dangerous. The Cowboys came back on a Saturday. High noon. Like they were making a point. There were 6 of them this time. More than before. They rode up slow and easy. Spread out in a line, like they were posing for a photograph. All of them armed. All of them smiling. Caleb was sitting on his porch. He'd been sitting there for 3 days. Waiting. His Colt was loose in its holster. His Henry rifle leaned against the wall within reach. He'd barely eaten. Barely slept. Just sat there watching the horizon, like a man waiting for Judgment Day. The leader of the group was a man named Frank Stillwell. He was a deputy. Wore a badge right there on his vest while he rustled cattle and burned barns and terrorized anyone who wouldn't pay protection money. That's how things worked. The badge and the outlaw were the same man. The law was a weapon pointed at whoever they wanted to rob. Stillwell stopped his horse 20 feet from the porch, close enough to talk, far enough to draw if it came to that. "Mr. Moss," he called out. His voice was friendly, conversational, like they were discussing the weather. "We need to have a conversation about your water rights." Caleb didn't move, didn't speak, just watched. "See," Stillwell continued, "Cattlemen's Association has been doing some surveying. Turns out your water hole sits on land that might not actually be yours. There's a dispute about the original claim. Real messy legal situation. That was a lie. Everyone knew it was a lie. Caleb's claim was registered proper, filed with the territorial office, paid in full. But lies didn't matter when the men telling them had guns and badges. What we're proposing," Stillwell said, "is that you sell us your land. We'll give you a fair price. Enough to start over somewhere else. Somewhere maybe more suited to a man of your politics." The other 5 cowboys laughed at that. One of them spat tobacco juice into the dust. "And if I don't?" Caleb asked. His voice was steady, calm, like he was asking about the time. Stillwell's smile faded. "Then things get difficult, Mr. Moss. Real difficult. Accidents happen. People get hurt. Sometimes people disappear entirely. You understand what I'm saying?" "I understand," Caleb said. "Good. So what's your answer?" Caleb stood up slowly. His hand hung loose by his side, near the Colt but not touching it. "Not yet. My answer," he said, "is that you can go straight to hell." The air changed. You could feel it, like the pressure before a lightning strike. The cowboys stopped smiling. Stillwell's eyes went hard. "That's unfortunate," Stillwell said. "Real unfortunate. You sure you want to play this out, Moss? There's 6 of us. One of you. Math ain't in your favor." "Maybe not," Caleb said. "But I'll get at least 3 of you before I go down. Who wants to be first?" Nobody moved. Because he was right. Caleb would get some of them. Maybe all of them if he was fast enough. And none of them wanted to die. Not really. They'd signed on for easy money. 4 rustling and protection rackets. Not for a real gunfight with a man who had nothing left to lose. Stillwell stared at Caleb. Caleb stared back. The moment stretched out like wire pulled tight, ready to snap. Then Stillwell smiled again, but it didn't reach his eyes. "All right, Mr. Moss. You want to be stubborn. We can respect that. But this ain't over. Not by a long shot. You think about our offer. Think real hard. Because next time we come back, we won't be so polite." He wheeled his horse around. The others followed. They rode off slow, taking their time, making sure Caleb saw they weren't scared, weren't running, but they were. I know because I talked to one of them later, after everything that happened. He told me they were all thinking the same thing during that ride away. That Caleb Moss was a dead man, but so were some of them, and nobody wanted to find out which ones. Caleb watched them go until they disappeared over the ridge. Then he sat back down, picked up his rifle, and waited some more, because he knew they'd come back. Men like that always did. They couldn't afford to look weak. Couldn't let some northern carpetbagger defy them without consequences. Word would spread. Others would get ideas. The whole system of fear they'd built would start to crack. So they'd come back. And when they did, people would die. Caleb was fine with that. He'd already accepted his own death, made peace with it, said his goodbyes to a life he'd never have, children he'd never father, the quiet old age that was supposed to come after all the struggle. All he wanted now was to take some of them with him, to make them pay in blood for what they'd taken from him. That was justice, not the kind written in law books, but the older kind, the kind that's been around since the first man picked up a rock to defend what was his. The desert wind picked up, blowing dust across the empty yard, across the burned remains of the barn, across the grave under the cottonwood tree where Caleb's father slept in the dry earth. The storm was gathering, and soon it would break. 3 days passed. Hot days. Silent days. Caleb didn't leave his porch. He sat there with his rifle, with his Colt, watching the horizon like a man waiting for death to show its face. He didn't eat much. Hardtack, jerky, water from the well that tasted like iron and dust. Food didn't matter anymore. Sleep didn't matter. Nothing mattered except being ready when they came. And they would come. He knew it in his bones. On the 4th day, a rider appeared. Just one, coming slow from the east. Not from the south, where the Cowboys usually came from. This was different. Caleb raised his rifle, sighted down the barrel, finger on the trigger, ready. But as the rider got closer, he recognized the horse. Then the man. It was Marcus Webb, town doctor from Tombstone. Older man, maybe 60. Gray beard, gentle eyes. The kind of man who'd never hurt anyone in his life. Caleb lowered the rifle, but kept it close. Webb rode up to the porch, dismounted slow. His joints creaked, age showing through. "Morning, Caleb," Webb said. "Mind if I water my horse?" "Help yourself," Caleb replied. His voice was rough from disuse. Webb led his horse to the trough, let it drink. Then he walked back to the porch, stood at the bottom of the steps looking up at Caleb like a preacher about to deliver a sermon he didn't want to give. "I came to talk sense into you," Webb said. "If you'll listen." "I'm listening." Webb pulled out a handkerchief, wiped his face. The heat was building even though it was still morning. "Frank Stillwell came to see me yesterday," Webb said. "He's planning something. Him and about a dozen other cowboys. They're talking about coming out here, finishing what they started." Caleb nodded, not surprised, just confirmation of what he already knew. "When?" he asked. "Soon. Maybe tomorrow. Maybe tonight." Stillwell's been drinking, working himself up, talking about making an example, about what happens to men who don't respect the natural order of things. "The natural order," Caleb repeated. His voice was bitter. "That what they're calling theft and murder now?" Webb sighed. "Caleb, I didn't come here to defend them. I came here to save your life. You need to leave. Tonight. Ride to Tucson. Get on a train. Go anywhere but here." "This is my land," Caleb said. "Land ain't worth dying for. It is when it's all you got." Webb climbed the steps, sat down next to Caleb without asking permission. They sat there together, 2 men in the shade, while the desert baked under a merciless sun. I treated your father, Webb said quietly, when the fever took him. Sat with him at the end. You know what his last words were. Caleb didn't answer, but Webb could see he was listening. He said, take care of my boy. That's all. Take care of my boy. I promised him I would. So I'm here, keeping that promise, asking you to leave, begging you if I have to. Caleb was quiet for a long time. When he spoke, his voice was soft, almost a whisper. Doc, you ever have something taken from you? Something you worked for, bled for, and then watched the men who took it walk around free, with badges on their chests, laughing about it in saloons? Webb nodded slowly. I lost my daughter to cholera when she was 8. Watched her die over 3 days. Couldn't do nothing to stop it. So yes, I know about losing things. But that wasn't a man who killed her, Caleb said. That was disease. These cowboys, they chose to burn my barn, chose to steal my cattle, chose to ruin me. That's different. Maybe, Webb admitted. But you killing them won't bring back what you lost. Won't rebuild your barn. Won't resurrect your horses. All it'll do is get you killed. And probably me too for sitting here, talking to you if someone sees. Then why are you here? Caleb asked. Webb smiled sadly. Because I'm a damn fool who still believes good men are worth saving, even when they don't want to be saved. Caleb looked at the old doctor, saw the genuine concern in his eyes, the kindness. It reminded him of his father, of a time when he believed the world had good people in it who'd stand up for what was right. But that time was gone, burned away with his barn. I appreciate you coming, Doc, Caleb said. Truly. But I ain't leaving. This is where I make my stand. Right here, on my land. And if I die doing it, at least I'll die as a man, not as someone who ran. Webb stood up, dusted off his pants. He looked old suddenly, tired, like he'd aged 10 years in 10 minutes. Then I hope you take some of them with you, he said, because that's the only justice you're going to get. He walked to his horse, mounted up, looked back at Caleb one last time. Your father would have wanted you to live, he said, not die for dirt and water. My father built this place, Caleb replied. He's buried here, and soon I will be too. At least we'll be together. Webb shook his head. Then he rode away, back toward Tombstone, back to safety, back to a world where doctors could heal people and laws mattered and good men didn't die alone in the desert fighting battles they couldn't win. Caleb watched him go. Then he went inside, checked his ammunition, loaded both his guns, and waited for the night to come. They came at dusk, when the light bleeds out of the sky and shadows grow long enough to hide in. Caleb heard them before he saw them. The sound of horses. Many horses. More than 6 this time. More than a dozen. The whole damn gang riding together like an army, coming to crush one man who wouldn't bow. He stood up from his chair, walked to the edge of the porch. His Colt hung heavy on his hip. The Henry rifle was in his left hand, loaded, ready. They appeared over the southern ridge, silhouettes against the dying light. 15 riders, maybe more, spread out in a line that stretched across the whole horizon, like the end of the world coming on horseback. Frank Stillwell was in the center. Even at a distance, Caleb could see the badge glinting on his chest, the symbol of law twisted into something ugly, something that protected the guilty and punished the righteous. They stopped 50 yards out, just sat there on their horses, waiting, making him sweat, making him think about what was coming. Caleb didn't move, didn't show fear, just stood there on his porch like a king in his castle. Even if that castle was just a small ranch house with a leaking roof and a burned barn behind it. Stillwell rode forward alone, stopped 20 feet from the porch. His hand rested casual on his gun, not threatening, not yet, but the promise was there. Last chance, Moss, Stillwell called out. Sign over the land. Take the money. Walk away alive. No, Caleb said. Simple as that. Just no. Stillwell nodded, like he'd expected that answer, like he'd wanted it even. Then you're a dead man, he said, and I'm going to enjoy watching you die. Maybe, Caleb replied, but I'll see you in hell first. Stillwell smiled. Then he raised his hand. The signal. Everything happened fast after that. Too fast to think. Only time to react. The Cowboys went for their guns. All of them at once. 15 men drawing iron. The sound like thunder rolling across the desert. Caleb was faster. He'd been practicing. Hours and hours of drawing and firing until his hand moved without thought. Pure muscle memory. Pure instinct. His first shot took Stillwell in the chest. The deputy fell backward off his horse, dead before he hit the ground, badge and all. His second shot caught a cowboy on the left, in the throat. The man gurgled and toppled sideways, boots still in the stirrups, horse dragging him away. His third shot missed, but his fourth didn't. Another cowboy down, blood spreading across his shirt like a blooming rose. Then the return fire came, bullets punching through the air, through the walls of the house, through the porch posts. One round clipped Caleb's shoulder, burned like a brand. He barely felt it. He dropped behind a water trough, used it for cover, raised his rifle, started firing methodical, careful, making each shot count. Another cowboy fell, then another. The survivors were scattering, trying to spread out, trying to flank him. But Caleb kept firing, kept moving, from the porch to the house, from window to window, never staying in one place long enough for them to draw a bead. He'd fought Indians and the cavalry, Apaches who knew every trick of desert warfare. These cowboys were tough, but they weren't soldiers. They were used to easy targets, to victims who couldn't fight back. They didn't know what to do when someone shot back hard. A bullet caught Caleb in the side, punched through his ribs. He gasped, tasted copper, but he didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Not until it was finished. He reloaded, fired again. Another cowboy down. The fight lasted maybe 5 minutes, but it felt like hours, like all of time compressed into gunsmoke and screaming horses and men dying in the dirt. Then suddenly it was quiet. The shooting stopped. Caleb crouched behind an overturned table, his ears ringing, his shoulder and side wet with blood. He could hear voices outside, cowboys shouting to each other, confused, scared. How many are down? I count 8, maybe 9. Jesus Christ, he's killing us all. We need to get out of here. No. Stillwell said we finish this. Stillwell's dead, you fool. Look at him. More arguing, more shouting, then the sound of horses. Some of them were leaving, running. The fight wasn't worth dying for anymore. But not all of them left. Caleb could hear boots on the porch. Someone was coming inside. More than one. They were going to rush him, try to overwhelm him with numbers. He checked his guns. The Colt had 3 rounds left. The rifle was empty. 3 bullets against however many cowboys were still standing. Not good odds. But then again, the odds hadn't been good from the start. The door burst open. 2 cowboys rushed in, guns blazing, firing blind into the dim interior. Caleb shot the first one in the face. The second one got a round off that hit Caleb in the leg. He went down, but he fired back, caught the cowboy in the stomach. The man screamed, fell, tried to crawl away, couldn't make it. Caleb lay on the floor, bleeding from 3 wounds now. His vision was going gray at the edges. He could feel his life pumping out with each heartbeat. But he wasn't dead yet. He crawled to the window, looked out. The remaining cowboys were mounting up. Maybe 5 of them left. They had enough. They were riding away. Fast. Leaving their dead behind. Leaving their wounded. Just running. Caleb watched them go. Then he rolled onto his back. Stared up at the ceiling. At the beams he'd cut and placed himself. At the roof that leaked when it rained. He'd won. Against all odds. Against 15 men. He'd won. But the price was everything. He could feel it. The coldness spreading from his wounds. The weakness. Death coming slow but certain. He thought about his father. About the grave under the cottonwood tree. At least they'd be together soon. At least he defended what was theirs. The last light faded from the sky. Darkness came, and Caleb Moss closed his eyes. Doc Webb found him the next morning. Rode out at first light when word reached town about the gunfight. About the bodies scattered across Caleb Moss's property, like seeds scattered by a violent wind. Webb expected to find Caleb dead. Everyone did. No man could survive what happened. Not against those odds. Not bleeding like he was. But Caleb was still breathing. Barely. Shallow breaths that rattled in his chest like dice in a cup. His skin was pale as milk. His lips blue. But alive. Somehow still alive. Webb worked fast. Bandaged the wounds. Stopped the bleeding as best he could. But the damage was bad. Real bad. The bullet in his side had cracked a rib. Maybe punctured something inside. The leg wound had shattered bone. And the shoulder was a mess of torn muscle. "You stubborn bastard," Webb muttered as he worked. "Why couldn't you just leave?" Caleb's eyes fluttered open, focused on the doctor's face. "Did I get them?" he whispered. "You got 10 of them," Webb said. 10 dead. 3 more wounded. The rest ran. Frank Stillwell's body is on your porch, still wearing his badge. A ghost of a smile touched Caleb's lips. Then the darkness took him again. Webb loaded him into a wagon, drove him back to Tombstone, to his office where he had proper tools, proper medicine, a place to work without flies and dust and the smell of death everywhere. The town was buzzing when they arrived. Word had spread fast. Caleb Moss, the quiet rancher, the northern carpetbagger, had killed 10 cowboys, had stood alone against an army and won. Some people called him a hero. Others called him a murderer. But everyone agreed on one thing. He'd done what no one else had the courage to do. He'd stood up to them, and he'd made them bleed. Sheriff Bean came to Webb's office that afternoon, stood in the doorway looking at Caleb lying unconscious on the examination table. "He going to live?" Bean asked. "Maybe," Webb said, "if infection doesn't take him. If his body can heal from what it's been through." Bean nodded. "Step closer. Look down at Caleb's pale face." "I should arrest him," Bean said quietly. "He killed 10 men. That's murder. Badge or no badge. They attacked him," Webb shot back. "On his own property. That's self-defense. Any court would see it that way." "Any court except the one in this county," Bean replied, "where the jury's half cowboys and the judge is afraid of them." Webb turned to face the sheriff. His hands were still bloody from surgery. His face was hard. "You arrest him, Bean, and I'll testify. I'll tell everyone how you sat drinking with the man who burned his barn, how you refused to help when he asked, how you're as guilty as Stillwell for what happened." Bean's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue, because Webb was right, and they both knew it. "He stays here," Bean said finally, "under your care. And if he lives, he leaves the territory. That's the deal. He disappears, and I don't ask questions about what happened out there." "And if he doesn't agree?" Webb asked. "Then I'll have no choice but to do my job." Bean touched his hat, walked to the door, paused. "I never liked Stillwell," he said. "Never liked any of them, really. But they kept order. Their kind of order. Now that's gone. Things are going to change around here." He left. Webb turned back to his patient. Caleb's breathing was steadier now, the color returning slowly to his face. He might actually survive. Against all odds. Against all reason. 3 weeks passed. Caleb healed slow, his body fighting the damage, the infection, the trauma of what he'd endured. He had visitors, more than he expected. People from town, ranchers from the outlying areas, men and women who'd been terrorized by the cowboys, who'd paid protection money, who'd watched their property burned and their livestock stolen and their lives ruined. They brought food, blankets, money, gratitude. "You did what needed doing," one rancher told him. "What we were all too scared to do." A woman whose husband had been beaten by the cowboys brought flowers, placed them on the table next to his bed, touched his hand gently. "Thank you," she whispered. "Just thank you." Caleb didn't know what to say. He hadn't done it for them. He'd done it for himself, for his father, for the principle of the thing. But their gratitude was real. Their relief was real. And slowly he began to understand that his stand had meant something beyond his own revenge. On the 23rd day he could walk, limping, leaning on a cane, but walking. Webb watched him pace the office like a caged animal. "You're healing faster than you should," Webb said. "Most men would still be bedridden." "I'm too angry to stay in bed," Caleb replied. His voice was stronger now, the rasp gone. Bean came again that evening, Found Caleb sitting by the window, looking out at the street, at the town that had ignored him, that had let him suffer, that had only cared after he'd spilled blood in the dirt. "You're well enough to travel," Bien said. It wasn't a question. "Maybe," Caleb replied. "Then it's time. You need to go. Tonight preferably, before someone decides to finish what the Cowboys started." "And if I don't want to go?" Caleb asked. "What if I want to stay? Rebuild my ranch?" Bien sighed, sat down, looked tired suddenly, like he'd aged years and weeks. "Then you'll die," he said simply. "The Cowboys are broken, but they ain't gone, and they got long memories. You killed their friends, their brothers. They won't forget that, won't forgive it. You stay here, you're a dead man. Just a matter of time." Caleb was quiet, thinking. The desert sunset painted the sky red outside the window, blood red, like the earth remembering what had happened. "Where would I go?" he finally asked. "California," Bien suggested. "Oregon. Hell, go back east if you want. Anywhere but here. My father's buried here." Then visit his grave tonight. Say your goodbyes, and leave. Caleb rode out to his ranch one last time, under a moon so bright it cast shadows sharp as knife edges across the desert floor. The place looked haunted, empty. The burned barn was a black skeleton against the stars. The house stood dark, windows like dead eyes staring at nothing. He dismounted at the cottonwood tree. His legs screamed with pain, but he ignored it. Pain was just the body's way of reminding you that you were still alive, still here when so many others weren't. His father's grave was simple, just a wooden cross and a pile of rocks to keep the coyotes from digging. Caleb knelt beside it, his hand resting on the sun-bleached wood. "I did what you would have done," he said to the silence, to the ghost of the man who'd raised him, who taught him that a man defends what's his. That principle matters more than breathing. The wind moved through the cottonwood branches, sounding almost like a voice, almost like approval. "But I can't stay," Caleb continued. "They'll kill me if I do. And I've already killed enough men to last a lifetime. So I'm leaving, going somewhere new, starting over, like you did when you came west all those years ago." He stood up, his leg protesting, his body reminding him of every bullet that had torn through flesh, every wound that would never fully heal. "I'll come back someday," he promised, "when it's safe, when enough time has passed. I'll come back and tend this grave proper, put up a real stone, plant flowers maybe, the kind Ma used to grow back in Kansas." He walked to the house, one last time through the door he'd built, past the table where he'd eaten 1,000 meals alone, past the chair where he'd sat cleaning his guns, preparing for war. In the bedroom, he knelt by the floorboards, pried up a loose plank, pulled out the leather pouch he'd hidden there. The money from selling his cattle before all this started. Not much, but enough to get him somewhere new, enough to start again. He took one last look around, at the walls, the ceiling, the space that had been his whole world, his dream, his prison, his battleground. Then he walked out, mounted his horse, and rode toward Tombstone without looking back. Doc Webb was waiting at the edge of town, sitting on his horse in the pre-dawn darkness, a saddlebag of supplies across his lap. "Thought you might need provisions," Webb said, "for the journey." Caleb took the saddlebag, nodded his thanks. "Where you headed?" Webb asked. "North," Caleb said. "Maybe Colorado, maybe Wyoming, somewhere with mountains, where the land is green and water don't cost blood." Webb smiled sadly. "Sounds like paradise compared to this hell." They sat there for a moment, two men in the darkness, one old, one forever changed, both understanding that some things can't be unsaid, can't be undone, can only be survived. "Your father would be proud," Webb said finally, "what you did, standing up to them, even if it cost you everything." "Or he'd be disappointed I didn't walk away," Caleb replied. "Hard to know. The dead don't give advice. No, but the living do. And mine is this: don't let what happened here poison the rest of your life. You did what you had to do. Now do what you want to do. Build something new. Find peace. Forgive yourself." Caleb extended his hand. Webb shook it. Hard, firm. The grip of men who'd seen terrible things and survived them. Thank you, document, for everything. Just don't die out there, Webb said. Would hate to think I wasted all those bandages on a corpse. Caleb smiled. First real smile in months. Then he turned his horse north and rode into the darkness, toward whatever waited beyond the horizon. The sun rose behind him, painting the desert in shades of gold and amber. The land looked almost beautiful in that light, almost forgiving. Like maybe it wasn't just a place where men came to die. Maybe it was also a place where they came to be reborn. Years later, I heard Caleb made it to Wyoming, bought a small ranch in the Tetons, married a widow with 2 children, lived quiet, never talked about what happened in Arizona, never wore a gun again except for hunting. Some say he became a different man, gentle, kind, the kind of father and husband who'd never hurt anyone. But I think that man was always there, just buried under necessity, under survival, under the harsh demands of a land that takes more than it gives. The Cowboys never recovered from that night. With Stillwell dead and their reputation shattered, they broke apart. Some were arrested, some were killed. Others just disappeared into Mexico or Texas or wherever men go when their time is done. Being lost his badge eventually. Nobody trusted a lawman who'd protected outlaws. He died broke and alone in Tucson. Probably deserved worse, but the world ain't always just. As for Caleb's ranch, it stood empty for years. The house slowly collapsed. The fences fell. The waterhole went wild. Nature reclaiming what men had tried to tame. But sometimes travelers passing through would stop there, would stand by that cottonwood tree and the grave beneath it, would remember the story of the man who stood alone, who faced impossible odds, who chose death over dishonor. And maybe that's what matters in the end. Not whether you win or lose, not whether you live or die, but whether you stand up when standing costs everything, whether you fight when fighting is futile, whether you hold the line when the whole world tells you to run. Caleb Moss held that line, and in doing so, he became something more than just a man. He became a story, a legend, a reminder that even in the darkest times, even in the most lawless places, there are still men who won't bow, won't break, won't surrender what's theirs without making the world pay for taking it. That's the Wild West I knew, the real one, not the romantic nonsense they write about in dime novels, but the hard truth, the blood and dust and moral choices that left scars deeper than any bullet. I was there, I saw it, and I'll carry those memories until they bury me in the same desert soil that holds so many others. That's all I got to say about Caleb Moss and the night he went to war with the Cowboys. Draw your own conclusions. Make your own judgments. Me, I just tell the stories. What you do with them is your own business. But what price did Caleb truly pay for his choice? Did his empire crumble to dust? Or did something greater rise from the ruins? And most importantly, did Daniel Cooper survive? Find out in part 2.